Oh, hi there. The Internet Archive is in serious trouble. A while back, I made a video going over the Internet Archive and their ongoing legal battle. Things were not looking good, but at the time, I thought everything would turn out okay. But since then, the situation has gotten worse. A lot worse. Pushing the archive to its breaking point, culminating in the site being shut down for an entire week. Since then, the Internet Archive has gotten back up, but the real question is, how many times can the Internet Archive, one of the most important sites for preservation on the internet, get knocked down before it doesn't get up? So let's start from the beginning and then work our way to the most recent events. The Internet Archive has always operated in a legal gray area, but they really started to push their luck nearly 2 decades ago when they created their open library in 2006. Through this program, the IA were scanning books and making digital copies that they lent out for free. The archive's owner, Brewster Kahle, justified the practice as an extension of public libraries in the digital age, utilizing a practice he calls controlled digital lending, or CDL. For every physical copy of a book owned by the archive, they lend out a digital copy on their website. And if they have 2 physical copies, they can lend out 2 digital copies, and so on. There are obviously some stipulations to this. They don't lend out books published within the last 5 years. You can only borrow 10 books at a time for up to 14 days per book. And all books have protections to prevent illegal copies from being made. This collection became a digital library of over 3 million books, lending out 25 million copies a year, even combining their collections with other public libraries. And the Open Library was very popular with the general public. They even received federal funding to digitize and lend out books about the internment of American citizens of Japanese descent during World War II. And in 2022, they made a push to make newly banned books accessible through their library. The Internet Archive has long claimed that controlled digital lending is fair use, since they're a nonprofit organization, but this has never been tested under legal scrutiny, and major book publishers were aware of the archive's actions and had been waiting for the right time to test controlled digital lending in court. And in 2020, the Internet Archive gave them the chance they were waiting for. In response to the COVID pandemic, the Internet Archive removed all restrictions on controlled digital lending, abandoning their own-to-loan ratio, allowing unlimited access to the entire catalog. Their justification was that since libraries around the United States were closed due to the pandemic, their collections were no longer accessible, so the Internet Archive took it upon themselves to make them accessible again through their website. In their legal defense, the Internet Archive wrote, "The National Emergency Library was launched on March 24, 2020. The number of borrowed digital copies through the NEL never exceeded the number of physical books that were unavailable due to libraries worldwide being closed due to the pandemic. The largest number of books lent out at a time was 888 copies of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, out of the 9,000 plus owned by public libraries in the United States that were currently inaccessible due to library shutdowns." But others did not see it the same way. 4 major publishers sued the Internet Archive over the NEL: Hachette, Penguin Random House, Wiley, and HarperCollins, claiming willful digital piracy on an industrial scale. During the entire trial, Judge Kodal was unmoved by the archive's argument, and in March 2023 ruled that their fair use argument failed. Due to this loss, the Internet Archive settled with publishers, removing their books from the open library and paying them an undisclosed amount, but they were permitted to appeal the court's decision. Their appeal focused on arguing that the open library had no negative effect on publishers, showing that despite the archive lending out books for over a decade, the 4 publishers provided no proof that the Internet Archive negatively affected their profits. They also quote Hachette's lawyers and make them sound really incompetent, which I thought was funny. "I don't have any evidence. Hachette conducted no harm analysis, but there's no factual analysis. It's just one inference you could make." In their conclusion, the IA conceded that even if the National Emergency Library is unlawful, controlled digital lending should remain legal. In their judgment, the Court of Appeals wrote, "IA asks this court to bless the large-scale copying and distribution of copyrighted works without permission from or payment to publishers or authors. Such a holding would allow for wide-scale copying that deprives creators." IA makes a final argument that even if its open library project did not qualify as fair use, we should restrict the injunction to the Open Libraries project and allow IA to continue CDL for books that IA itself owns. In our view, the fair use analysis would not be substantially different if limited to IA's CDL of the books it owns. So we decline IA's invitation to narrow the scope of our holding or of the district court's injunction. The IA's appeal was declined. Not only was the National Emergency Library deemed unlawful, but due to the archive's hubris, this lawsuit led the entire practice of controlled digital lending to be ruled in violation of copyright law. Currently, the Open Library is still up and running, lending out many books that are still protected under federal copyright law. But given this huge blow to their legal defense, its days of lending out copyright material might be numbered. Things were looking bad for the Internet Archive, and they were about to get much worse. Back in 2016, the Internet Archive began the Great 78 project that aimed to digitize over 250,000 78 RPM records made between 1880 to 1960 and make them publicly available on the internet. 78 records were the most popular audio format in their day, but by today's standards, they are archaic. The records were made of shellac, which I learned while making this video comes from beetle secretions and is on everything, even food, so I'm gonna pretend like I never saw that. Anyways, 78s were notoriously fragile and noisy, and they became obsolete in the 40s and 50s, surpassed by the much smoother sounding vinyl records. The Great 78 project was a colossal undertaking to preserve these recordings. Just like vinyl, 78s are double-sided, meaning they had to digitize what amounted to 500,000 songs from long-defunct labels, covering a wide range of genres, from jazz to stand-up, polka to big band tunes, and so much more. Even unusual recordings like The Sounds of Laughter. According to lead audio engineer George Blood, probably 95% or more of this content is not available anywhere. Whether they were small labels or obscure pressings, they have been lost to time. Each 78 was digitized in 16 versions, utilizing 4 different styli, recording both sides of the groove wall with or without equalization, all aiming to preserve the original recordings without modification. When the Great 78 project began in 2016, their actions were legal under federal copyright law, but that would change just a few years later when Congress passed the Music Modernization Act in 2018. Before this, copyright law only protected music made after February 15th, 1972. But Title II of the Music Modernization Act, the Classics Act, established new rules. The bill created very specific protections for older recordings that are too complicated for the scope of this video, but for our purposes, we need to know that the law made many aspects of the Great 78 project illegal, and the Internet Archive were well aware of this. In July 2020, the Recording Industry Association of America, the RIAA, informed Brewster Kahle of their infringement. You and Internet Archive have reproduced thousands of sound recordings in which RIAA member companies own or exclusively control copyrights, and have made these recordings available to the public for unrestricted download and streaming, all without the consent of the rights owners. Kahle responded to the RIAA, but continued operations as usual. All the while, record labels were waiting in the shadows for the perfect opportunity to strike. And that moment came in August 2023. The very same day the Internet Archive settled their lawsuit against book publishers, a group of music publishers led by Sony Music and Universal Music Group sued the Internet Archive, Brewster Kahle, and George Blood over copyright infringement for the Great 78 project. The suit listed 4,142 recordings that were being illegally hosted that included the music of Billie Holiday, Louis Armstrong, Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, and many more, specifically calling out Bing Crosby's White Christmas that had been accessed through the Great 78 project over 10,000 times. And at a price tag of $150,000 per offending song, the Internet Archive were looking down the barrel of a colossal $621 million lawsuit. The suit claims, Internet Archive and the other defendants have a long history of opposing, fighting, and ignoring copyright law, proclaiming that their zealotry serves the public good. In reality, defendants are nothing more than mass infringers. Nor can defendants justify their activities as necessary to preserve historical recordings. All of the pre-1972 sound recordings listed on Exhibit A are already available for streaming or download from numerous services authorized by plaintiffs. These recordings face no danger of being lost, forgotten, or destroyed. The archive has released public statements arguing against the lawsuit, stating that the number of downloads were too small to impact publishers, that 95% of the archive's collection is not readily available anywhere, and that the sound quality of the recordings are so low that they fall under fair use for preservation. And I kind of thought this was a bad faith argument when I was reading it, but after listening to the 78s, yeah, this might be their best defense. The audio quality is really that bad. So bad I can't imagine it harming legitimate streams or downloads at all. Like, listen to this. The mix is like 60% static. The lawsuit expertly attacked these ideas, showing that since 2020, music from the Great 78 Project has been accessed over 500,000 times in New York alone. While not demonstrating a loss of profit, it shows that it has potential to do so. They note that the Music Modernization Act does allow libraries to make older recordings accessible for free, but requires that they do a reasonable search to determine that they are not commercially available. And they point out that the archive makes the label for each record available on their website. These labels clearly show the company's name and logo to which they belonged to, meaning it wouldn't be difficult for them to determine who owned the rights to the music. The Internet Archive tried to get the case dismissed, but in May 2024, this was denied. The record companies are requesting a trial by jury. This lawsuit will likely continue well into 2025. While the archive is fighting what's looking more and more like a losing battle, they were being attacked on a different front, torn apart from the inside out. During the final days of May 2024, the same month they tried to get the music lawsuit dismissed and failed, the Internet Archive was subject to a DDoS attack, where the site was flooded with fake traffic that took the site down for hours at a time throughout the week. On May 28th, the group SN Black Meta took responsibility for the attack. They made this cringe AI video claiming that the attack was meant to bring attention to their pro-Palestinian cause. In the video, they say they are not a bunch of teenagers, which has led everyone to the assumption that they're just a bunch of teenagers trying to get some online hacker cred. But this was just the beginning. In late September, the attacks escalated. Black Meta continued alongside separate hacker groups, leading to a massive data breach, where 31 million user accounts had their email and encrypted passwords compromised. In early October, the site was defaced by hackers, informing users of the data breach. When you accessed the site, there was a pop-up that read, "Have you ever felt like the Internet Archive runs on sticks and is constantly on the verge of suffering a catastrophic security breach? It just happened. See 31 million of you on HIBP." HIBP refers to the site Have I Been Pwned, where you can check if your information has been compromised. To prioritize keeping the archive and everyone's personal data safe, the entire site was offline for over a week. By October 13th, the site was restored as read-only, but the attacks would continue through October, resulting in more outages. As of right now, everything is back online and running smoothly. The hackers have seemed to back off, but it's very possible that that could change any day. All in all, things are not looking good for the Internet Archive. The loss of their lawsuit against the book publishers, losing their appeal, still having to face an even more expensive lawsuit, all the while being taken down from the inside. It's hard to say where the Internet Archive goes from here, but by their very nature, the archive operates on the limits of copyright law, and as long as they continue doing so, they will be fighting these kind of battles for decades to come. That is, if they're still around to fight. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And let me know what you think of this entire mess. Big shout out to my top tier Patreon supporters, Miss Dana, Otterly Happy, Vinny Cataldo, Can You Say Rocco Mafleur, and Odesta Honeycrisp. Thank you all so much. This is Mike with All Things Lost. I'll see you soon.